It's been approximately 149 days. That's how long it's been for the Mia Mottley-led BLP administration since the historic 30-seat win of the Barbados government back in May. Now, since that win, they've gotten straight to work on a few policies and actions. The removal of road tax, a massive a massive debt restructuring program, taxation aimed at helping to plug the holes of our existing deficit, and of course, most recently, the job cuts that are estimated to impact over 1,500 workers in the public service. But with these actions, we've also seen the government extend itself to be very much in touch with the people of Barbados and also in the region. So tonight on The People's Business, we take a look at the first 150 days of this administration's time in office. And with us to do this, Minister in the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Investment, the Honorable Marsha Caddle. Good evening, Minister.
Good evening.
Secretary of the Board of the Institute of Internal Auditors, Krystle Howell.
Good night.
President of the Barbados Economic Society, Shane Lowe.
Good night.
And journalist with the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, Ryan Broomes. Good night. And of course, what would People's Business be without you, the people? You can contact us at 228-5562 or 228-5563 or email us at talk@cbc.bb. The People's Business will be right back after this. And welcome back to The People's Business. So let's get straight into it. I'm going to start with one of our younger guests, Krystle Howell. Did the massive 30-seat win, did it set up unrealistic expectations?
I think that it was an unprecedented occurrence, so you cannot prepare adequately when you don't see something like that coming. That being said, a lot of discussion has been held around whether it is reasonable to be paying so many ministers, and I've tried to get persons to understand. It is not a matter of how many persons you have or do not have. It is a matter of how productive they are. So if there is a case that you have 30 ministers who are working extremely hard, they're doing the government's work, and you can see results, and they're adding to the revival of the economy, why is there a problem? I would have a problem if you had ministers who were not making sure that their ministries were productive. And if that is the case, considering the campaign that would have been held on accountability, I think that any person who is not contributing to the growth of our economy or the revival of their particular ministry should be held accountable before a 5-year vote happens. So that would be my expectation, to make sure that the 30 is justified and that you don't have this great expense and nothing is shown for it.
Okay. Minister Caddle, I guess you're uniquely placed to speak on this matter.
Yes. I think we have to put the size of the cabinet in the context of the job to be done. I don't think Barbados has ever been in this place before, certainly never before in the place that we found it when we came to government. I say all the time, we don't just have an economic or financial problem. Every aspect of life in Barbados as we knew it had disintegrated. So we had institutional decay on top of the economic issues, and we had, the social cohesion had started to disappear. It meant that not only did we have the mission critical issues that we outlined in the manifesto, but we also have before us the entire transformation of a country. Because a country that's 50 years old cannot use the same inputs for growth as it is accustomed to using. And I'll say another thing. If you look at where the ministers are placed, I'll take my ministry. We have the Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment. Minister Strawn works on the finance side. I work on the Economic Affairs and Investment side. In Economic Affairs and Investment, we have the country's public sector investment program. Every capital project is in that program, and that has to be prioritized according to what is important for the country. Economic Affairs has the statistical service and all kinds of other organs. So, the truth is that if we did not have as many cabinet ministers as we had, we would not be able to work as quickly and be able to transform the country as quickly as is necessary.
Okay. Shane Lowe, your thoughts on, because for me, I think Bajans expected, I don't think we expected overnight, but somehow I think we expected more, and I'm not sure more what.
Well, I think a lot has happened, and many things have happened that we haven't quite seen the implications of them. A good example of that is the decision to restructure the external debt. Most Barbadians are more concerned with the domestic debt because many Barbadians have bonds or T-bills or whatever it is that they had. And so they will have the effect of getting less interest and waiting for a bit longer to get that money. The external debt default, though, was a very important decision that was made because what it did in the short term, it provided short-term relief for the country in terms of the money that was spent on debt from the reserves, so it was able to stabilize the reserves. Over the long term, though, there are potential implications about the rate at which you have to borrow going forward, or a premium that you might have to pay given that you've defaulted. And so what will be important is that the country is able to do the things it said it will do so that going forward, investors will feel that the country is more creditworthy. So many things have happened. Many things have happened that we have not felt the effects of as yet, but certainly they will have an effect internationally and going forward domestically.
You talk about the restructuring of the foreign debt and not paying it at the moment is going to have repercussions, but isn't that a short-term thing? Because even though we've had another downgrade over the weekend, I think Standard & Poor's are still saying they expect that credit rating to come back up.
I think it will come back up over time, but slowly. I don't think you're going to get back to investment grade right away. Research has shown that when you do default, there is a premium you pay for a while before, and it doesn't have to necessarily be 10 years, it might just be 3 or 4 or 5 years. But certainly, the country will not be in a position to borrow internationally if it wanted to. Now, the plan is to not have to borrow, and so there might not be negative implications. But of course, if the BERT program falls off track, then you might have to borrow, and then that's where the implication comes in. So it depends.
Yeah, I want to speak to that because, you know, this country has not been able to borrow international capital markets for the last 5 years. So I don't want us to get too concerned that we are not going to be able to fill the financing gap. In the BERT plan, we address the financing gap. I mean, the plan is supported by the IMF, but the IMF support amounts to about $291 million, 220% of our quota. But the gap is filled by other multilaterals. Okay. And so you have the IDB, CDB, and others coming in. So the plan is designed so that we do not have to go to international capital markets in the short term. But I want to draw an example. Seychelles did domestic and external debt restructuring, and were able to access capital markets again within 3 years. So, I mean, I think there's precedent, and I believe that we are going to be on the right track very shortly.
Well, all I would say that I think it depends on the success of the plan. If the plan is successful, then I think by all means this is great. I think everything hinges on that.
Brian Broome, the first thing that happened was the mini budget, and we saw the repeal of the NSRL. The road tax was replaced with a fuel tax, raise in non-contributory pensions, the abolition of tuition fees for locals at UE, but then there was a garbage and sewage contribution tax. So have we replaced one set of taxes for another?
I think it all boils down to, and I think this is important here because you remember that we would have had taxes in the last administration that were specified for certain things, for trucks, for buses, etc.
QEH, etc.
But this is where the rubber has to meet the road, and if the program does that, where if you're taking a tax for the sewage collection and etc. and garbage collection, then we have to see the trucks. That's the first tangible. We have to make sure that the sewage system is operating as it should be and that's operating efficiently. In terms of the buses, you have to see the buses so that whoever the granny that lives in St. Joseph isn't saying she's waiting in the bus terminal for 3 hours. So I think the real where the rubber needs to meet the road is to show the difference, that you have a difference here where the taxes are being taken, not just being taken, but the taxes being taken for the specific purpose that they're being taken, that they're actually going towards that sector or that ministry to make sure that those tangibles come about.
I think Bajans have been patient so far. There've been a lot of communication from the government, but what do you think is the time frame between this tax and when I see trucks?
Well, I know in terms of the garbage trucks, the buses, I think there was an issue in Jamaica where something was damaged. And I think even with the best of intentions, sometimes things will happen that you can't plan for. But we're now, 5 months in? you still, I personally think that you have to give the government a little bit of time, given
in
the
honeymoon
fact
period.
you're still somewhat in the honeymoon period. However, people realistically on the ground might think differently, though. You know, Barbadians tend to think, no, they want it, no, I put you in, so therefore I want this thing done, no. But the reality is, as I'm seeing it unfold, is that there might be some issues, but I know that at least I think the garbage trucks are supposed to come in, I believe, this is October, I think it's next month, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
So, right.
sorry,
Go ahead.
if I could respond.
Minister, put a pin in it. We're going to take a commercial break,
Sure.
and when we come back, you're watching The People's Business. And we're back. You're watching The People's Business. My guest this evening, the Honorable Marsha Caddle, Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment. Krystle Howell, she's a secretary on the board of the Institute of Internal Auditors, the Barbados chapter. Shane Lowe, the president of the Barbados Economic Society. And Ryan Broomes, who is a journalist at the CBC. Now, before we went to break, Minister, you wanted to say something?
Yes, what I wanted to say was that I believe that already with the buses, there has been an improvement in the number of buses on the road. When Tropical Storm Kirk passed, we lost some because there was some waterlogging, there was some damage. But there was an increase. And I also want to say that, you know, the mission critical timeline for us, and we're even trying to beat our own timeline, but it is 6 months. You know, we believe in holding ourselves accountable. I can't speak to what happens in cabinet, but I can tell you that there are high levels of accountability. Every minister is meant to answer for the mission critical and the transformational parts of the agenda. And I think we understand the importance, because the truth is that we can't have the recovery in the economy if people aren't able to get to work, if the country isn't able to function. So it is not lost on us. And I believe that the improvements are already being felt, and more will be felt.
Shane Lowe, there are those who are saying that it's like trying to turn the Titanic on a dime, because you're not just dealing with the economic issues, but then the technological issues and how far behind we are, how antiquated a lot of our processes are. Do you think that they can deliver on those things as well? Because we have a civil service that's very stuck in their ways, let me put it that way.
Well, those speak to more behavioral issues, and I think that will speak more to leadership and the people who are leading those in the civil service. In terms of the actual money now needed to do that, I think what needs to happen, and I think it's outlined in the BERT, is a shift in the government's expenditure from current to capital. So over the last 2 years, what we've seen is a steady decline in capital expenditure, and capital expenditure is mostly for buses, roads, infrastructure that helps to build productivity. Current expenditure is more wages and salaries, things you have to pay for every month, every year. What needs to happen is there needs to be, while expenditure needs to come down, there needs to be a shift, so more towards the capital. So you're building capacity not only within the country itself, but in the public sector, so it can more efficiently and effectively provide the services it needs to.
If there's one thing that this administration has done well, is communicate with the public. We've seen more press conferences and addresses to the nation than we've ever had before. Is that enough? Are the people as well informed? Because I'm still hearing the little rumblings on the ground, especially in terms of the layoffs. So is it enough?
No, as a communicator at heart, it was a pleasant change. The platforms and so on, in terms of Instagram and Facebook and every platform that you can think of, it's progressive. And in terms of getting message out mechanically, I think that is good. I think there's still maybe some work that needs to be done in terms of when it gets right down to the explaining in terms of the nitty-gritty of how it will affect the average person. I think there's room for improvement there. And I think that's why you would still hear some of the rumblings, because you might get something that's general that might pass the average person on the street. So yes, you're having this engagement, but the engagement still needs to be broken down sometimes a little further to help that person on the street really appreciate and understand exactly what is going to happen in terms, you know, that are real to them.
We've seen a few missteps. The situation with the road road tax and vehicle licenses. Only over the weekend, I was hearing someone saying that some people have been told verbally that they're being let go, etc. Is that to be expected in an administration that is still this new?
If anybody expects perfection, they're not. Human beings are not the ones that will do that, and every system has human beings. We expect though, to see improvements where that is concerned. And the most important thing, which internal auditors talk about it all the time, is having policies and procedures in place. And the process of getting there is going to be a very extensive one, because you can't just say, okay, we can just have this here and people just follow it. You have to develop it. So even if you have existing policies, which in many cases they may not be, you now have to develop those, understand how the system is supposed to work, how it actually is working, try to see how you can close the gaps, make sure that you have a system in place to communicate these policies to the staff that you have, and have training. So just that alone will give you an idea of how comprehensive that process has to be, because you need to identify the risks in your system. What happens if this doesn't work, and what happens if that doesn't work? And what do we have in place to make sure that we stop that, we prevent it?
And what's our backup plan?
Exactly, you took the words right out of my mouth. So having that in place, you will begin to see if persons adhere to it and they're properly trained, that you will see improvements in how things are done. So in terms of even the communication, the expectation may have been that you would have spoken to the persons who are the managers first, explain to them what is supposed to happen so that they will follow a procedure and be consistent across the different ministries. And then you will explain to them how the communication is supposed to go out. You will have a meeting first, you talk to the persons in person, you have the names, you have them identified, you make sure these things are in place first before that happens. But it's going to take time to get there, and I think persons have this expectation that everything does have to happen now. So they're very anxious, they don't trust because they see everybody as the same thing, and we would have been very badly burnt before. And persons who are burnt, they don't trust as much. So that is going to happen for a while. And unfortunately, ministers' backs are going to have to be very broad as they take those blows. So every single mistake is going to be highlighted and used as an excuse to say this is exactly what we had before. But I think the most important thing is seeing them correcting the mistakes and making sure that there is true transformation in improving the systems that we have, as opposed to just carrying on with business as usual. But that is going to take time, and it is a very extensive process. But we have a lot of ministers to get it done.
I want to speak to both those points. One, the issue of communication. I think that in terms of getting the message out and getting the explanations out, the media really has to be a partner in that. You know, we are always available to be engaged. I mean, we push our message, but I think that government is not the only actor in the public space. And so I think the media has to take on more squarely its role and its sense of responsibility to make sure that you're not just chasing a headline, but you're chasing the facts and the truth.
And challenging questions.
Exactly.
You see, the challenge there is that you have very different media houses operating for different purposes. Some may say for different political reasons and corporate reasons, and you will get a different message coming out from each one. It's not always going to be something that you will like.
Right. Yeah, but the thing is, I want us to understand that there are different actors here. And when it comes to messaging and creating the narrative, government has a lot to do, and I do think that we've been pushing, but I also think that we have, those other actors in the space have to commit to having a responsible conversation. On the question of the missteps and the mistakes, you know, perfection is often the enemy of progress. You know, we are coming off of 10 years of nothing happening, no action. Shane made the point earlier about the fact that there were no real capital projects, nothing was moving in the economy. And we have come in with a commitment to move and to act. We had in our manifesto and in the Covenant of Hope, not just what we would do, but the spirit in which we would do it. And then we very quickly developed the Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan to show people exactly what we were going to do. We have never said that our government would be perfect and get everything right the first time around. But certainly we are willing, if there are missteps, to relook and say, okay, we hear your feedback and we've reviewed, and this is what we think makes sense in the circumstances.
Is it that because we've, as you said, we've been so badly burned in the past, that we're now more sensitive?
Very much
and
so.
so therefore every little thing is a big thing.
Very much so. And in some instances it is justified, because there are going to be areas where persons feel as though they have not heard the full story. So it's not necessarily even a case where you've been lied to, but you feel as though something's been left out and you didn't realize it was going to have this kind of an impact. So especially with the campaigning, a lot of the times the campaigning is about what we can give to the public, and you share all of the positive sides. The last elections, when there was even a hint of talk about privatization, the other campaign was to bring out an ad about a bus and scare Barbadians into thinking that they were going to have to do this and do that. So understandably, there is going to be a push more towards the positives, but then the reality set in, and to be very honest, it takes a very broad back to be able to implement some of the things that are required to be able to get this country to move forward. And I applaud that because it is necessary, but it's also very painful. And coming off of the campaign and going so quickly into a plan of pain, and people actually feeling it in their pockets, they're wondering, like, this is what I voted for, this isn't what I voted for, I didn't vote for myself to go home, because a lot of persons who are going home would have voted for this party, and then they're feeling as though they've been betrayed. So that has to be managed, and I think in terms of the communication, because there are many facets to communication, it's much different to hear some person who sounds as though they care and they're offering packages and they're trying to see how they can implement things in place to catch those who have been badly affected and have some feedback in terms of where it happens, as opposed to some person who says, y'all know what temporary means. The communication makes a big difference.
Sensitivity.
You have to be sensitive, and people take that for granted.
And on that note, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we go to our phone calls, we check out our emails and what our viewers are saying, and we'll be listening to you. And we're back here on The People's Business. Now, the administration has gone to the IMF and they've agreed that 1,500 jobs are going to be cut from the public service and state-owned enterprises. There are those who say 1,500 in the first instance. Will there be more cuts? Minister Caddle?
Okay, so first to clarify that we have gone to the IMF, yes, but it's in the context of a plan that the government of Barbados has and needs. So I want us to understand that, fund or no fund, there are certain things that needed to be done in terms of the economy and the way that the public sector functions. Now, we have said that we cannot protect every job, but we're going to protect every Barbadian. Shane was talking earlier about the size of the current expenditure. And I'll tell you what happened. What happened is that if you look at the wages and salaries component, you'll see that it was starting to decline over the last few years. But what you probably didn't see is that slowly the transfers and subsidies were creeping up. And so, exactly. And so those 3,000 that were sent home summarily without any thought, without any of the late nights that we've been having trying to look at, you know, what is it that makes sense to re-engineer the economy, 3,000 sent home, and all of a sudden drainage, you know, isn't working and all these other sectors aren't working. Some of those people came back into a back door on the transfers and subsidies side in SOEs. And so what we have done, contrary to what the former governor of the central bank would like to have you believe, that 4,000 or 5,000 have to be sent home, we have said that labor is not only going to be on the front line of the adjustment. And I think that people are forgetting that this is an adjustment program where we have sought to evenly share the burden. What did we start with? We started, for example, with revenue measures that would have hit people who were coming into Barbados. So revenue in the tourism sector, accommodation and room rate tax, and then a tax that's levied at the airport. We looked at the debt restructuring, domestic and external, again, so that capital also has to share the burden of the adjustment. So if we look at where the adjustment is taking place, labor is actually where we came at the end to say, you know, what is the least that we can do in this sector. But the truth is that it is not so much about making a fiscal adjustment as it is about re-engineering the public sector and how it works. And I want to say this quickly. We also see this as an opportunity for economic enfranchisement, because we haven't said, well, go home and good luck. The BERT plan is a plan of economic enfranchisement. If you are going to readjust or reconfigure your state-owned enterprises, what are the opportunities, for example, for the people who have been working as bus drivers to then own their own buses and share their own buses and start a company to be able to provide these services? How do we get Barbadians to shift from simply working for somebody to working for themselves and being able to provide
Essentially
service?
employing people.
Exactly, and employing people and being able to provide services in that context. So we are actually, we see this, it is a difficult time. We plan to help take people through it. We are establishing a household mitigation unit in the Office of the Prime Minister because we plan to find all 1,500 of those people and make sure that they have a plan for where they want to go to next. And that's what Ministry of Economic Affairs and Investment is committed to.
Everyone can't work for themselves. All 1,500 of these people will not become small business owners. So what is supposed to happen to those who determine that I don't want to own a bus and I don't want to run the Connelltown Bridgetown route or whatever? What happens to those persons?
So there are a range of things that we are discussing and that we're establishing. One of the large projects, one of the large transformational things that we are doing has to do with the digitization and modernization of government. You know, we use a lot of paper. We spend a lot of time shuttling paper and files and everything back and forth. It is difficult to share information and make it transparent if you can't put it online and if people can't see it. So we are about to embark on an enormous digitization movement and effort. And that is going to require people to come and be retrained and reskilled and contribute to that. Another part of our program that you see in the BERT has to do with access to agricultural land. There are people, there's a young man in my constituency, for example, who for the longest time has been trying to get access to agricultural land, you know, at a rate that makes sense for him, that he can see a significant return on. You know, we say that young people aren't into farming, but that's not true in all
and in
cases.
different ways too.
Exactly.
Minister, we're going to take a break there. We have a call. Good evening. Welcome to the People's Business.
Good night, John.
Hello.
I'm checking. There are a lot of people, self-employed people, who are, there's supposed to be 20,000 people are self-employed, only 21,000 people paying income taxes. What are you going to do about that?
Thank you, sir. He said that there are over 21,000 people who are self-employed, but they're not paying any taxes. What is the plan for that?
I think a part of what we have to do, and that what we've already started doing, is making sure that, you know, we pay some attention to tax administration and making sure that we are capturing everyone who needs to be captured. The BRA is right now involved in a couple of projects supported by the Latin American Bank and a few others, developing a system to make sure that those things are strengthened. Enforcement is something that we plan to continue to invest in, to make sure that, you know, that everyone is able to carry the burden when it comes to taxes. So we're giving some attention to that.
I've heard the Prime Minister talk about this training fund so that the people who are coming out of the public service can be retrained to do other things. What about the ones who remain in the public service? Because some of the things that she's talking about digitization, so therefore you're not depending on some clerk to bring a whole set of files, etc. So that too, doesn't that call for some kind of social or at least industrial re-engineering as well, in terms of how people think?
Of course. I mean, when we talk about transformation, and if you look at the manifesto, you know, I said this recently, the BERT plan, I think I said this in Parliament this week, it does not contain every single thing the government plans to do. And really, the manifesto is a policy document that is guiding our growth and development plan that is being developed. But the 30 million a year in training is meant to be directed as well to the public service, because, I mean, the reskilling and upskilling is required for the transformation that you see. I mean, we have, for example, a new Ministry of Maritime Affairs and the Blue Economy. There are all kinds of skills and inputs that are going to be needed there that perhaps we don't now have. So it is absolutely the intention to have a process of ongoing training for those in the public sector and those outside. I mean, you know, I think that when it comes to our service product nationally, that we need an immense training drive for that, because, you know, I think that this is a service-based economy. We do need to diversify the range of those services, but I think we need to set our country up to be able to deliver services better. So yes, absolutely, the training is meant to be more far-reaching.
Ryan, your thoughts?
Well, our performance, I believe, in the ease of doing business index over the years, and anything that is forward thinking in terms of getting, not just putting money in people's pockets. And as I understand, especially the trust loans that are supposed to be coming soon, it's not just a case of, okay, you're getting $5,000, go start your business. You're walking people through, listening to what their idea is, walking people through what their idea is, and hopefully giving them an opportunity to be able to pay back at reasonable rates, etc., with a business plan that they would essentially could work. And once that is able to be done, so that you can capture a lot of those people. You said everybody doesn't necessarily start a business, but even if they don't want to start a business, if this person is able to start one, they may be able to employ some of those people. And so you have to look at it in that way, holistically. And if realistically it can be rolled out like that, then it can work.
All right, we're going to go to the phone lines. Good evening. Welcome to the People's Business. Okay, it seems as though we've lost that call. There are those who say that it's a balancing act, trying to balance practicality with empathy. Your thoughts, Shane?
It is a very important balance in that, because while you have targets to meet from a financial perspective, many times the people are affected, right? If you cut wages and salaries by X amount, if you have a primary balance of Y amount, it usually means you either have to earn more tax revenue, and mostly residents pay taxes, or you have to cut expenditure, and that expenditure is typically spent on citizens. And so many of the things that Minister Caddle mentioned about retraining and ensuring that people have something to do afterward that is very productive for themselves, those things are going to be very important, because at the end of the day, if you just send someone home and they're there for a while, many people become, I don't want to say almost employable, but people look at their CVs and see a big gap in their employment history and start to ask questions. And so I think, yes, there needs to be a balance in that, because at the end of the day, we need people to be in the tourism sector greeting the tourists. We need people to be the ones in the public sector actually doing those jobs. And if we ignore people, ultimately it will be to everybody's detriment.
Mm-hmm. The place we're at, education, not only at this level for civil servants, etc., but certainly in the schools, to kind of re-engineer the schools as well, so that young people coming out are thinking in that kind of way, thinking of starting their own businesses, looking for the particular areas where they can start that business. But it feels as though at the university level, we're still focusing on doctors and lawyers. Is there some hub that we could set up, like a tech park, in which young people can do startups, create apps, etc., and other applications?
Yeah, this is one of the areas that I actually have some concerns about, especially when we were talking about free education, because I thought it should have been more directed to free education in the areas that you think will help the economy to move forward. So if you think that this is a particular area that the country is already oversaturated or it isn't working for us anymore, then I would not encourage any free education or tuition in that area, so as to guide persons into choosing something else. The other thing too is that the current educational system we have is very much focused on making sure that persons work and produce a certain amount of work, and they're obedient, and they do this, and they think a certain way. So persons who think outside of the box are usually discouraged, and because this is the answer. And that kind of transformative thinking has to come through not just the primary and secondary school levels, but right through. Because if we don't have that kind of creative thinking and that kind of encouragement, then we will always have persons who are looking for instructions and waiting to be told what to do, as opposed to taking charge and being able to bring ideas and bring transformation to the businesses that they go out to work for. So that level of thinking has to start, because if we don't make that first step, we're never going to get there, and then we're going to continue to produce what has not been helping us to move forward.
Agreed. We're going to take another break. When we come back, we're looking forward to hearing from you. You can call us at 228-5562 or 5563, or email us at talk@cbc.bb. And we are back here on the People's Business. Minister Caddle, you said you wanted to speak to the area of education.
Yes. Well, first, one of the things that we've said is that, well, and you'll see it in the BERT, that we talk about being a high-skilled, knowledge-based, technology-based, carbon-neutral economy. And all these things are part of what we're discussing here. One of the plans And I believe that when the Prime Minister speaks next week to the Town and Town Planning Act, that she'll talk about some of these things. But one of the plans is for Bridgetown to be a smart city. Now that doesn't happen in a vacuum. It means that you need people, both people who are already here and people who are willing to come in, and young people who might spend 1, 2, or 3 years to work with people here and make that a reality. But there's already so much going on in that area. There are initiatives with teaching young people to code, and you know, there are people in the private sector who are also working with us to make sure that that becomes a reality. But I also wanted to pick up something that Krystle was saying earlier. I mean, Krystle, having been at the Granny Adams lecture a little while ago, knows how I feel about this. That education is really where the transformation is going to happen. That we have to teach young people to be willing to take risks, because that's what it's about, to be willing to take risks and to be willing to question things.
But not only that, I think we also need to teach Barbadians to understand failure.
Yes.
We
Failure
are
is
very
not accepted.
unforgiving.
Yeah.
We're very unforgiving of failure.
Very.
If I break this glass today, 10 years later, and I'm up for a promotion, somebody's going to say, "Well, you know, she broke a glass."
Exactly.
So we just don't understand failure.
Yeah, it's a whole shift in the approach to learning and to experimentation. You know, one of the things I've always dreamt about in terms of the context of the Caribbean is for us to be willing to experiment. There's certain things that you can't get wrong in small economies, but small economies also give you an opportunity to try things, to try things in a small place and say, well, let's see if this will work. And we have to be willing to experiment and realize, okay, that didn't work for us, but perhaps we move on to something else. But I wanted quickly to pick up something else that Krystle mentioned, which is this notion of simply targeting the kinds of sectors that you want people to work in. Yes, I think there needs to be a kind of re-engineering and kind of a labor market planning. But I also think that we have to let people learn and practice what they're interested in. And they may not stay there. You know, I started doing linguistics. And I think sometimes when you start with a liberal arts background, and that's why we talk about STEAM now and not STEM, because arts is also important for technological learning and science learning, that it just opens your mind to be able to learn things in a different way. We also talk about being every young Barbadian learning to swim and learning a second language. And why is that? Not just because it's helpful in case you fall off a boat, but because when you are put out of your comfort zone, you start to realize that adaptation is really what you need to be teaching. You need to be teaching young people to adapt. So you need to adapt in the water. You need to adapt in a place where English is not the first language. And that kind of teaching gets people comfortable with being uncomfortable and with failing.
Okay, let's go to the phone lines. Good evening. Welcome to the People's Business.
Good night to the panelists. I just want to raise 2 points with you. The first one deals with the digitization of government. And I think that, truth be told, is that if one is going to move from an environment of being labor intensive and to adapt the various technologies, the numbers of individuals that I believe that would be unemployed over a period of time is going to be quite significant. And the fact that these unemployed individuals may be used to, in any digitization project, the numbers will be so far unbalanced that such as it is may not be able to absorb the numbers that I believe would be unemployed. My second point is that is the private sector in Barbados fully digitized? And if the government is to achieve such, it would be the first. And I will compliment the government in going ahead of the private sector that is not digitized. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Krystle, your thoughts?
I didn't catch quite everything he said, but the last part about the digitization and government taking the lead and making sure that they're getting ahead, they're at a disadvantage, which I think what we've seen so far gives some hope. It doesn't give assurance, but it does give hope. the speed with which they've been tackling issues and the communication. Yes, there are some things that I would like to see improve, and at this point, it's very difficult to say that you're going to rate in terms of how they're going to achieve, because a lot of things have not been achieved yet. But again, a lot of the timelines they've set have not come to pass yet, which people also need to remember. A lot of the things were promised within 6 months, and it's not 6 months yet. But seeing the progress that they're making towards this is already unprecedented. So if there's any administration that I actually have some hope for achieving this move to digitization, yeah, regardless of the areas that I do believe are not going quite right, I overall have to say yes, I do have hope. And at the end of the day, if I did not have that hope, where would we end up anyhow? Because there's only one Barbados, and we are already very much behind. And if we don't rally behind, regardless of which alignment you have and support, if we don't give the support, what are we really expecting to happen?
Okay, we're going to take another break. When we come back, we take we'll go through some emails. Stay with us. And we're back. Just before we went to break, we had a caller, and Shane, you wanted to make a comment based on the caller's question.
Yeah, so the caller mentioned that the digitization might lead to fewer people being required to work in the public sector, and the question about will the private sector be able to absorb those people? And I guess we have to ask the question, why are we digitizing the public sector? And it should be to provide a more efficient service to the private sector, so that the private sector can grow more quickly and absorb those people. And so I think that should be the core of the exercise. I don't think that the public sector should employ people just for the sake of employing persons. I think the private sector should be the one that leads the employment growth. And so I understand the caller's concern, and it is a valid concern, but I do think that needs to be the lens through which it's viewed. The fact that we need to make the ease of doing business, as Ryan mentioned, better, so that the private sector can lead the way to grow the economy.
Speaking of the private sector, what is their role now in terms of, because everything we've talked about here so far seems to be very government driven. Government is driving the digitization of the of the civil service. Government is doing this, government is doing that. But what now should our private sector be doing if government is putting all of this infrastructure in place?
Well, I say all the time that government does not grow, the private sector grows. I mean, really, the role of government, and we say all the time that, unfortunately, over the last decade, we got this idea that government is a tax. The only role of government is tax and spend. But really, the role of government, really, in the third decade of the 21st century, is to facilitate business, to make sure that we create the environment that the private sector is able to thrive, to employ more people, that new businesses are going to come along. We believe that we have a very strong partnership with the private sector, but I also want us to understand that the private sector is not just the big brick and mortar businesses that we see when we pass the highway. That we also need to facilitate people to enter the private sector. Vendors who want to get licenses to vend are part of the private sector. And so a part of our role is to facilitate that. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we are doing work, for example, on the town planning legislation, because that is one of the areas of legislation that is really key to investment. The speed with which people can get a construction permit, can get news back on their application, whether they can even go online and see what is the status of that application.
Correct.
These things are important for the private sector, as Shane was saying. I think we have to realize what's happening in our country now. The last administration kind of committed us to convergence of our tax rates, between international business companies and domestic companies. That convergence has to happen by the end of the year. And what it means for us really is that we're going to see a huge loss in the international business sector. But we also have a real opportunity, depending on how that convergence goes, for the private sector to have an advantage if they are looking at kind of lower overheads in terms of corporation tax. It means that we are going to be looking to the private sector even more, to take advantage of what this new environment means for them, especially for domestic business, and to step up and to make sure that we really see the diversification in the economy that we're looking for.
I want to run through just a couple of our emails. One person is saying that as a Barbadian living overseas and having to transact matters in the government offices, they're hoping that as the civil service is being transformed, that there's a guiding set of procedures such as ISO being implemented so that everyone will be fully trained as to their job function, so that I would not have to be told, come back later, the person that is doing that is not at work today. One other person said that they note with interest that the government's method of sending persons home is based on last in, first out. The person says that they've been recently a part of the civil service and they can state categorically that the seasoned civil servants are not interested in change and accountability, even though this is what is needed in an antiquated civil service. How will the government manage the change in attitude and work ethic, which are also essential to re-engineered and competitive civil service? But I think we addressed that a little earlier. Another gentleman wants to know what is government going to be doing about certain statutory corporations with poor performances in management or of public property, like for instance Pelican Village.
Well, yeah, the state-owned enterprises, I mean, that adjustment and modernization is extremely important. We talked earlier about the ballooning transfers and subsidies and the fact we have to get it down. But it's not just the amount, but it's also how these entities are structured to deliver. I mean, we've seen, it's not a secret, that even accounting information, and we've seen some of the auditing information that's come out recently, and looking at, you know, how management has worked in some of these entities, has left a lot to be desired. I mean, speaking frankly, and that's why we are embarking on what we're embarking on. We have to go in and make sure that government is fit for purpose, both parastatals and central government, and that's something that we're committed to. So over the next few days and weeks, you will see that some attention is being paid to these statutory corporations.
Okay, we've got just about a minute and a half left, so Minister, I'm going to take those as your final words.
Yeah. No, I think it's been quite the hectic first 149 days. Lots has happened, like I said. Some of the things that have happened, we haven't quite felt the effects yet. For example, the external default and the benefits we've seen from the reserve perspective, but whatever potential issues might arise if the BERT program falls off track. I do think the BERT program, or rather, I think it's imperative that it does work. I don't think we have a choice that it works. So whether I think it will work or not doesn't really matter. And I do wish the administration the very best, because I think that this is going to be quite the adventurous and exciting next few years in Barbados.
I think so as well, right?
Capital works projects and private sector major projects, those beaches, for example, I think those will be critical going into next year, especially in terms of revenue, on the revenue side, and also in terms of job creation. I'll leave it there.
Okay. And Krystle, you get the last word.
I would like to see more details personally in terms of how accountability is going to be executed. So for instance, the same audit that you spoke of with the Transport Board, if something like that had to happen again, how exactly are people going to be held accountable? If you have a capital works project and contracts do not follow the proper bidding process, or funds are wasted, or these kind of things happen, what exactly is the method to hold persons accountable? Because it's all well and good to say that no, but then when the rubber hits the road and things don't go as we expect, what is the plan of action? That's what would make me feel more comfortable, but as Shane said, we wish you all the best.
We're out of time. Thank you so much, the Honourable Marsha Caddle, Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment, Krystle Howell, Secretary on the Board of the Institute of Internal Auditors, the Barbados Chapter, Shane Lowe, who's the President of the Barbados Economic Society, and journalist here at the CBC, Ryan Broomes. Good night.